Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Science Nerd, where quiet curiosity meets the slow burn of wonder, and where you can think about impossible things while also feeling your eyelids get heavy. Tonight, we're not going to wrestle with how the universe began, or whether it will end in fire ice, or maybe just awkward silence. Instead, we're going to look under our own feet, literally the ground you're standing on right now, and ask a question that's both simple and unsettling. What if we're not the first thinkers, builders, or explorers, not the first to look up at the night sky and wonder what's out there? What if long before pyramids and skyscrapers, long before satellites and TikTok, some other civilization rose right here on Earth, lived, thrived, maybe even cracked a few bad jokes, and then vanished without a trace? Now, before you picture aliens in silver suits or a lost continent with mermaids sipping coconut lattes, let me clear something up. I don't mean mythical places like Atlantis or ancient astronauts coming down for a vacation. I mean something homegrown, biological, intelligent, something that evolved here on Earth, made its mark, and then disappeared so long ago, the planet itself forgot about it. If that sounds like the start of a science fiction novel, you're not wrong. But here's the twist. It's also a serious scientific question, one that geologists and astrophysicists have batted around in conferences, not loudly, but quietly, like you'd whisper a secret at a sleepover. The question isn't whether we'd find skyscrapers under Antarctica or a smartphone embedded in a lump of coal. The question is subtler. If an advanced civilization lived millions of years ago, would we even know? Would the traces survive the endless recycling of the Earth's crust? Or would everything's cities, tools, language, even their skeletons have been erased, churned, and folded back into stone? Before we go digging, let me do something unusual for a science story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from right now. And yes, I know I can't actually hear you, but humor me. Look at your clock. What time is it? Funny, isn't it? We're talking about civilizations that might have vanished millions of years ago. And yet, here we are, connected in this small shared moment, separated by miles, but tied together by curiosity. And if you like this kind of late-night brain massage, I'd be thankful if you tapped like or subscribed. It helps this sleepy little signal drift toward other curious minds. No pressure. Of course, think of it as an invitation, like a faint trail of footprints across the sand. So settle in, maybe lie back if you can. Loosen your jaw, let your thoughts slow down to something close to the speed of plate tectonics, because we're going to take a long, careful walk, not just through human history, but through deep time itself. And before we can ask if someone came before us, we need to understand what deep time actually means. Spoiler alert, it's way longer than that Netflix series you keep telling yourself you'll finish. When we talk about ancient history, most people think of a few thousand years. Pharaohs, ziggurats, the folks who thought carving Stonehenge was a good use of a weekend. Even when we reach back to the dawn of human civilization, we're still only talking about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. That might feel like forever long enough for empires to rise, fall, and be turned into expensive TV dramas. But geologically speaking, it's a blink. The Earth, on the other hand, is staggeringly old. Not just millions of years old, billions. About 4.5 billion, give or take a few hundred million. At this scale, a few 100 million years is basically like forgetting what day it is on vacation. For most of that time, there were no humans, no mammals, not even plants on land for a while. Life spent eons in the ocean evolving, experimenting, sometimes taking 2 steps forward and 1 catastrophic asteroid impact back. And here's the humbling part. Despite how empty that sounds, that was when most of the Earth's story was written. Layer by layer, rock by rock, chapter after chapter. But the Earth isn't a librarian. It doesn't keep everything neatly cataloged. Wood rots, metal rusts, bones dissolve, and time doesn't just pass, it acts. It buries, melts, crushes, and erases. Mountains rise and crumble. Oceans open and close. Continents drift, crash, and break apart. Every few 100 million years, the face of the Earth is basically unrecognizable. So when you look at it that way, it's not just that evidence gets lost. It's that anything surviving for more than a few million years is already a minor miracle. Fossils are rare. Intact structures are rarer still. So if there had been another civilization, a truly ancient one, its traces would be competing against volcanoes, glaciers, tectonics, erosion, and let's be honest, a planet that acts like a messy roommate who throws out everything without asking. Let's imagine, just as a thought experiment, that 100 million years ago, in the middle of the dinosaur age, something intelligent appeared. Maybe upright, maybe not. Maybe aquatic, maybe airborne. Maybe they didn't build with stone at all. Maybe their technology was biological or chemical or something we wouldn't even recognize as technology. Maybe they developed culture knowledge, even art, and then poof, something happened. Climate shift, catastrophe, or maybe just the slow fade of time. And now, we're here poking around millions of years later, asking whether we'd ever know they existed. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We humans are not nearly as permanent as we like to think. Our skyscrapers, our highways, our cloud storage accounts, none of them are built to withstand geological time. Leave a modern city alone for just a few centuries, and nature starts reclaiming it. 1,000 years, and it's rubble. 1,000,000 years, and the ground has probably folded it into something that looks more like granite than Google headquarters. This isn't science fiction. It's what we already know from archaeology. Even recent human traces are fragile. Think of the fossil record. It's patchy at best, not because life wasn't abundant, but because fossilization is ridiculously picky. You need rapid burial mineral replacement protection from erosion, and oh yes, a truckload of luck. Without that, bones just vanish. Multiply that challenge by millions of years, and you start to see why finding a stone tool from 1,000,000 years ago is extraordinary, while finding a stone iPhone from 100 million years ago is, well, let's just say, don't hold your breath. Buildings, they crumble. Metals corrode. Plastics break down. Even concrete, as tough as it seems, eventually loses the fight, unless something is preserved in a freak geological time capsule, like volcanic ash or permafrost. It's gone. So if a civilization had existed in the distant past, especially one that didn't build giant stone monuments, like pyramids, we might never know. We'd be standing on their graves, their neighborhoods, their dreams, and have no clue. And yes, someone has actually taken this idea seriously. In 2018, 2 scientists, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, published a paper exploring this very possibility. They called it the Silurian hypothesis, named after a fictional race of intelligent reptiles from a British sci-fi show. Because apparently, scientists can't resist geeking out just a little. The point of their paper wasn't to say, yes, lizard people once ruled the earth. It was to ask, how would you even detect an ancient industrial civilization if it had existed? What fingerprints would it leave behind in the rocks and sediments? The answers weren't skyscrapers under Antarctica or Wi-Fi routers in sandstone. They were subtler chemical signatures, isotope ratios, rare elements, synthetic molecules. Basically clues you'd only notice if you were squinting at the wallpaper of deep time and thought, that's odd. And that's where the fun begins. Because maybe the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Maybe it's just how things look when a planet wipes the chalkboard every few 100 million years. If you want to find evidence of life long gone, you look at the fossil record. But the fossil record is like a diary with 99% of the pages ripped out, scribbled on, and then dunked in coffee. We only get the rare entries that happen to be preserved under just the right conditions. A fish that died and sank into soft mud. A fern flattened in a swamp. A bug trapped in amber. Basically Jurassic Park in miniature. Now think about us, modern humans. If you froze time right now and waited 1,000,000 years, what would survive your favorite sneakers? Nope. Your phone. Probably not. That pizza box on your counter. Sorry, it's compost. Maybe your teeth are stubborn, but your Wi-Fi router, that's dust. The uncomfortable truth is this. Even if a civilization as advanced as ours existed millions of years ago, most of their stuff wouldn't make it. And I don't just mean their IKEA furniture. I mean entire cities. Steel, glass, plastic, concrete, they all eventually degrade. Unless something gets sealed in a perfect time capsule, Earth's recycling program chews it up. This is why geologists say the fossil record is biased. Not politically biased, though. That might be funny. Biased toward certain environments. Things that lived near water and got buried quickly have a fighting chance of showing up later. Things that lived on mountaintops, not so much. So even if an ancient civilization built its version of New York City, unless they happened to do it next to a swamp that instantly fossilized the place, the odds of us finding it are about the same as winning the lottery while being struck by lightning and discovering Bigfoot all at once. But here's where it gets interesting. Some traces last longer than buildings or bones. Chemical traces, think of it like Earth's receipts. You might throw away the sandwich wrapper, but the bank record still shows you bought it. Industrial civilizations, ours included, leave chemical fingerprints. Carbon isotopes in the atmosphere, synthetic molecules in sediments, heavy metals spread across the globe, tiny plastic particles in the oceans. These are signals that might outlive us. This is exactly what the Silurian hypothesis paper suggested. If another industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, you wouldn't expect to find their skyscrapers, but you might find unusual layers in the rock's layers, with strange isotopes or chemical compounds that don't occur naturally. For us, future geologists might stumble across a weird plastic-rich layer and go, that's odd. Did volcanoes suddenly learn how to make Legos? Here's a fun way to think about it. Imagine you're a detective, but the crime scene is 100 million years old. The fingerprints are gone, the body is gone, even the building is gone. All that's left is a faint chemical smudge. Would you still be able to guess what happened? That's the challenge scientists face. Of course, the Silurian hypothesis isn't saying, yep, ancient lizard people definitely built skyscrapers. It's more like a thought experiment. It helps us think about how fragile our own evidence is. It forces us to wonder what traces of our civilization will survive deep time. And the answer might be humbling, not much. Let's take plastics as an example. Right now, microplastics are everywhere. Ocean soil, even the air we breathe. Millions of tons of the stuff. You'd think they'd last forever, but even plastics break down eventually, especially under heat and pressure. Give it a few million years, and most of those particles might transform into something unrecognizable, blended into rocks. A thin layer, maybe detectable but subtle, the kind of thing a future scientist might puzzle over. Another example, carbon emissions. We're currently altering the atmosphere in measurable ways. The ratio of carbon isotopes is shifting a direct fingerprint of fossil fuel burning. That signal could last far longer than our skyscrapers. Future geologists, human or otherwise, might notice a sudden spike and ask, what happened here? Did Earth suddenly get indigestion? And then there's nuclear technology. If there's one thing that leaves a clear mark, it's radioactive isotopes. Some of them last tens of thousands of years, some last millions. If our species vanished tomorrow, those isotopes would still be sitting around like neon post-it notes in the geological record, but even they would fade eventually. So when you zoom out to the scale of tens of millions of years, it becomes clear the Earth is excellent at cleaning up after itself, like the world's most ruthless janitor. And that's both fascinating and unsettling, because if Earth is this good at erasing us, who's to say it hasn't done it before? Here's where skeptics usually chime in. If another civilization existed millions of years ago, we'd have found something. Tools, bones, ruins, anything. And sure, that makes sense up to a point. But remember, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when you're dealing with a planet that's been hit by asteroids, boiled by volcanoes, drowned by oceans, and scrubbed clean by glaciers. Think about it. The oldest large-scale stone structures we've built, the pyramids, are about 4,500 years old. That's nothing compared to Earth's age. If humans disappeared tomorrow, the pyramids might survive for tens of thousands of years, maybe longer. But give it 1 million years, and they'd likely crumble too. 10 million? Forget it. By then, they'd be weathered into nubs, buried, or ground away entirely. So yes, it's possible that an ancient civilization left nothing we'd recognize. But it's also possible they left hints so subtle we've overlooked them. Strange chemical anomalies, odd fossil gaps, myths that remember what science forgot. Speaking of myths, let's take a detour. Humans love stories. Myths often preserve echoes of real events, distorted but persistent. Flood myths exist in cultures around the world. Volcano gods, sky gods, serpents and heroes. Are these just inventions, or do they sometimes preserve faint memories of disasters long past? It's tempting to wonder if buried within all those myths, there's an echo of something even older, something we can't quite put our finger on. Now, I'm not saying Gilgamesh was bros with a Silurian engineer. I'm just saying human memory is weird. Oral tradition can stretch surprisingly far. What if some stories are fragments of older realities? We'll never know for sure, but the thought makes falling asleep a little more exciting, doesn't it? At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but why does this matter? Even if there was some lost civilization millions of years ago, it doesn't affect me paying rent or deciding what to eat for dinner. True, but here's why it matters: perspective. When we realize how easily traces of our existence could vanish, we start to see ourselves differently, less as permanent rulers of Earth, more as temporary guests. We see our fragility, And maybe, just maybe, we learn a little humility. Because here's the kicker right now. We are writing our own geological layer. Every time we burn, fuel shape landscapes, build cities, or toss out plastic, we're adding brushstrokes to Earth's record. One day, long after we're gone, some future mind, whether human or something else, might dig down and ask, who were these people? What did they do? Why did they disappear? That's the true heart of the Silurian hypothesis. It's less about proving ancient civilizations existed and more about confronting the reality that ours won't last forever. It asks us to imagine ourselves as just another chapter in Earth's long, strange story. Not the beginning, probably not the end, just a chapter. And if that doesn't make you feel small in the best possible way, I don't know what will. So as you lie there, listening, drifting towards sleep, remember this: the ground beneath you is ancient, beyond imagination. It has carried countless stories, most of which are erased. You're standing on top of a history we'll never fully know, and that's okay. Mystery is part of the charm. Close your eyes. Picture the earth slowly turning continents, drifting like lazy rafts, oceans rising and falling mountains, being born and dying again. Whole civilizations, maybe even more than one, lost in that endless shuffle. And yet here we are, alive right now, able to wonder. That in itself is a kind of miracle. So sleep easy, time traveler. Tomorrow the world will look the same. But tonight you've peeked behind the curtain into a time so deep it almost feels like dreaming. So let's play with this idea a little more. Imagine that somewhere in the distant past, long before humans, long before mammals, even the earth played host to a civilization. Not necessarily skyscraper builders or internet inventors, maybe something stranger. Maybe they shaped their world in ways we wouldn't even recognize as technology. What would they leave behind? Here's a fun test. If aliens landed on Earth 100 million years from now and dug through the layers, what would they think of us? Would they piece together our story from plastic fragments? A spike of carbon in the rocks? Maybe a buried subway train? Or would they just shrug their alien shoulders and conclude, some weird chemistry happened here, next planet? And if that's the case for us, then what if the same thing happened before a story, erased leaving only whispers in the stone? Now at this point you might wonder, why are scientists even talking about this? Don't they have actual work to do? Fair question. But here's the thing, exploring weird questions often sharpens our tools for real ones. By asking, what would an ancient civilization look like in the rock record, we get better at spotting subtle signs, not just of past life on Earth, but maybe on other planets too. Think about Mars. Right now, it looks barren, dry, dusty, the world's worst desert. But billions of years ago, Mars had rivers, lakes, maybe even oceans. If life, let alone civilization, ever arose, there, how would we know? We'd need to look for the same kind of subtle signals, chemical oddities, strange isotopes, weird sediments. In other words, the same clues we'd expect if Earth once had a forgotten civilization. So the Silurian hypothesis isn't just Earth-centered, it's practice for cosmic detective work. It helps us think about how fragile evidence can be and how easy it is to miss. Let's zoom back in on Earth for a moment. What are the best candidates for long-lasting traces of us plastics? Carbon spikes, radioactive isotopes. We've mentioned those. But there's also something else. Geology itself. Mining, drilling, damming rivers, reshaping coastlines. Those are geological scale changes. A future scientist might notice odd layers of disturbed rock rearranged minerals, even artificial lakes that don't quite fit the natural pattern. Picture this: millions of years from now, some geologist of the future, whether human alien or maybe a talking dolphin with glasses, finds a layer of sediment that looks strangely uniform. Mixed into it are weird particles, microplastics, odd alloys, traces of fertilizer. They scratch their head or fin and wonder, did nature do this, or did someone interfere? That's the kind of trace we might leave. And if it's the kind of trace we leave, maybe it's the kind of trace others left too. Now, before you get too excited, let's rein it in. Most scientists don't think there actually was an ancient civilization before us. The fossil record does show a lot of life, and so far, nothing that screams industrial activity. No plastic spikes in the Jurassic, no uranium anomalies in the Devonian, no surprise IKEA catalogs in the Carboniferous. But, and this is important, the possibility isn't zero. It's just vanishingly small. And even if no one came before us, the exercise of imagining it teaches us something valuable: humility. Because here's the truth: we are temporary. We like to think of ourselves as permanent fixtures, but the Earth has a habit of proving otherwise. Dinosaurs ruled for over 150 million years. We've been around for a blink. If we vanish tomorrow, the Earth will keep turning. Forests will regrow. Rivers will shift. In a few million years, our cities will be nothing more than faint geological hiccups. It's sobering, but also freeing. We are part of a much bigger story, one we can't control and barely understand. Now let's have a little fun. Suppose there really was an ancient civilization. What would they have been like? If they were ocean dwellers, maybe their cities were coral-like structures grown rather than built. If they were forest creatures, maybe they shaped living trees into habitats. If they were underground, maybe their tunnels are long gone, collapsed and filled. Their art, maybe patterns etched in DNA. Their tools, maybe chemical reactions we wouldn't even recognize as technology. Their monuments, maybe long vanished, their ruins, erased by glaciers or plate tectonics. And who knows, maybe they even worried about the same things we do: energy, climate, survival. Maybe they left behind their own version of bedtime stories, myths, or comedy sketches. And maybe, just maybe, they laughed at the same kind of silly jokes. What do you call a dinosaur who fixes the internet? A megabyte. Okay, maybe their humor was better. One can hope. The point is, imagining them helps us imagine ourselves. It reminds us that intelligence doesn't have to look like us, and that permanence is an illusion. One more thing. If ancient civilizations could vanish without a trace, what does that say about us? About our legacy? Right now, we're loud. We're global. We've covered the planet in satellites, radio signals, and skyscrapers. But give it 1,000,000 years, and most of that will be gone. Maybe a few fossils of cities remain. Maybe a thin layer of weird chemicals. That's it. So the real question is not whether someone came before us. It's whether someone will come after. Because if Earth erased them, it can erase us too. And if it erased us, it might make room for the next civilization, one that will never know we existed, except as a faint, puzzling blip in the rocks. And maybe millions of years from now, they'll sit around their version of a campfire, or a podcast, or a YouTube channel called Sleepy Science Nerd 2.0 and ask, what if we're not the first? So tonight, as you lie back and let your eyes close, think about this. You are part of a fragile temporary species, scribbling on the margins of Earth's vast diary. Most of those scribbles will vanish, but right now, in this moment, You get to wonder. You get to imagine. You get to laugh at bad dinosaur jokes and marvel at the strange short chapter we're writing. And that in itself is enough. Sleep well. Let's step back for a second and think about why this question, were we the first, sticks in our minds so much. It's not just curiosity. It's because deep down, we know how fragile we are. And we're fascinated by the idea that maybe, just maybe, we're not alone in the parade of history. The Earth has had 4.5 billion years to host life. Complex animals have only been around for about 600 million of those. Humans, barely 300,000 years. Civilization, just 10,000. Do the math, and you realize our entire history fits into a geological blink. So much time came before us that the idea another species could have risen and fallen isn't actually crazy. It's just hard to prove, and proving it is the tricky part. Evidence is fragile. Fossils are rare. Cities crumble. Chemical traces get buried or recycled. After millions of years, the Earth covers its tracks better than a teenager hiding snack wrappers before their mom comes home. Still, there are windows of possibility. The Silurian hypothesis suggests we look for anomalies, those odd layers in the rock that don't match the usual pattern, like a sudden unexplained warming, or a spike in certain chemicals, or unusual isotopes. If we see those, maybe, just maybe, we should ask if something intelligent was at work. Take the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum about 56 million years ago. Temperatures spiked, carbon levels soared, the planet warmed dramatically. Scientists explain it with natural causes, massive volcanic eruptions, methane release. But some wonder, could that event have been triggered by something else, something industrial, something that looked a lot like what we're doing right now? Now, most scientists would laugh at that suggestion, but that's the beauty of this thought experiment. It forces us to look again, to consider every angle. Because if we can learn to detect civilization signatures in Earth's deep past, we might also learn to spot them on exoplanets orbiting distant stars. Imagine that for a moment. Astronomers one day detect weird chemical patterns in the atmosphere of a planet hundreds of light years away. Not just oxygen or methane things you might expect from life, but traces of industrial byproducts, artificial gases, molecules that don't appear naturally. In other words, alien pollution. Wouldn't that be wild? Our first evidence of extraterrestrial life could come not from radio signals or flying saucers, but from an ancient alien trash problem. The universe might introduce itself, not with a handshake, but with a garbage dump. It's funny, but also profound, because it means civilizations, any civilization, leave scars, and those scars, faint as they might be, can outlive the builders themselves. But let's not get too cosmic yet. Let's stay grounded, literally. If you could walk back through time, what would you see? Picture Earth 100 million years ago. Dinosaurs roam, giant ferns tower. Oceans are alive with creatures stranger than fiction. Would you see any hint of civilization? Probably not. You'd just see life doing its thing. But underground, in the chemical record, maybe there's something subtle, something no human eye has ever noticed. That's why geology is such a humbling science. It tells us we're looking at snapshots of an ancient movie, but most of the film reels are missing, whole chapters lost, and the chapters we do have are often blurry, cracked, incomplete. It's like trying to piece together an entire Netflix series from 2 random frames and a subtitle in another language. You'll get some of the story, but you'll never be certain you got it right. And that's okay. Mystery keeps us curious. Of course, there's another angle here, one that's less about science and more about philosophy. If other civilizations did exist and vanished, what lesson does that hold for us? Because right now, we're at a crossroads. We're powerful enough to change the planet, but not always wise enough to handle the consequences. Climate change, biodiversity, lost nuclear risks. Our fingerprints are everywhere. If another civilization faced the same challenges and didn't make it, that should scare us, or at least wake us up, because the Earth doesn't play favorites. It doesn't care if you're a dinosaur, a Silurian lizard person, or a human with Wi-Fi. If you push too hard, if you overshoot your limits, the planet hits reset. That's the humbling part of the Silurian hypothesis. It's not really about proving ancient aliens or lizard engineers. It's about reminding us civilizations are temporary. Species are temporary. The Earth endures, but we might not. Now, if you're lying in bed thinking, wow, this is a little heavy for a bedtime story, don't worry, I'll lighten it up. Imagine those hypothetical Silurians. Maybe they had TV shows too. Maybe they argued over who would win in a fight, a giant sea turtle or a shark with laser beams. Maybe they invented sports or fashion or TikTok dances millions of years before us. And then one day, it all vanished, leaving nothing but puzzled geologists in the future. In a way, that's comforting. It reminds us that no matter how seriously we take ourselves, time eventually humbles everything, even our weirdest trends. Someday, long after we're gone, there will be no record of avocado toast or cat memes, maybe just a thin chemical line in a rock saying, something strange happened here. And isn't that kind of funny? The whole weight of our culture reduced to a single stripe in the dirt. But don't mistake that for meaninglessness. On the contrary, it makes every moment more precious, because the fact that our story might fade makes it all the more important to live it fully now, to laugh, to wonder, to dream, to tell bedtime stories that make people smile even as they fall asleep. Because if there's one thing time can't erase, it's the experience of being alive right now. And that's something worth savoring. So here's the big takeaway. Maybe we weren't the first. Maybe we'll be forgotten. But that doesn't make us less significant. It just makes us part of a larger, richer, more mysterious tapestry. The Earth has seen wonders we can barely imagine. Civilizations may rise and fall. Species may come and go. But through it all, the planet keeps turning, carrying stories too vast for us to hold. And tonight, you get to be part of that story. Close your eyes. Picture the ground beneath you, ancient and layered with memories. Picture civilizations you'll never know, their laughter and fears carried away by time. Picture the future where someone or something might wonder about us the way we're wondering about them. And as you drift into sleep, let that thought comfort you. You are not alone in the flow of history. You are one note in a song billions of years long. And even if the echoes fade for now in this moment, you are here. Sleep well, dreamer. The Earth will keep your secrets safe. Now let's follow this trail of thought even deeper. If civilizations rise and vanish, then what about the clues they leave behind? Let's be brutally honest. Earth is not a kind archivist. It does not lovingly preserve our history in neat folders. No Earth is more like a messy roommate who keeps cleaning up by throwing things into a blender and then lighting the blender on fire. Think about plate tectonics. The crust is constantly being recycled. Oceans close, mountains rise, continents drift. The oldest ocean floor we have is only about 200 million years old, barely yesterday in geological terms. So if an advanced oceanic culture once flourished, much of their home has already been swallowed back into the planet. Add in erosion weathering ice ages and volcanic eruptions, and you start to realize most of history doesn't just fade, it gets obliterated. This makes archaeology almost like detective work in a house where someone vacuumed up all the fingerprints and then painted over the walls 10 times. No wonder it's hard to find anything that screams civilization. But sometimes the earth leaves odd scars. Take fossil fuels. Coal seams, for instance, are essentially ancient ecosystems pressed and cooked into black rock. Oil reserves are chemical time capsules of plankton and algae. These are natural, yes, but imagine if we stumbled on something similar that looked artificial. Would we know? Would we recognize the difference between natural oddity and engineered residue? This is where imagination comes in. Scientists who propose the Silurian hypothesis aren't saying, yes, there were ancient iPhone users. They're saying, if there were, what evidence would they leave? And would we even spot it? And that's not just a fun late-night question. It matters for how we search for life on Mars, Venus, or exoplanets. It teaches us humility in our interpretations, because sometimes what looks natural may not be, and sometimes what looks artificial may just be nature doing its weird thing. Here's a humbling thought. Our own legacy may not be obvious either. We like to imagine future archaeologists digging up our skyscrapers, our cars, our Netflix servers, but give it enough time and all of that crumbles. Steel rusts, concrete cracks, glass shatters. In 10,000 years, most of our cities would be forests and ruins. In a million, almost nothing. What might last? A few things. Plastics. Microplastics are already everywhere. Ocean soil, even our bodies. Some of those could get trapped in sediments and fossilize. Radioactive isotopes. Our nuclear activity leaves distinct chemical fingerprints that decay slowly but measurably. Fossilized structures, maybe subway tunnels or underground vaults, survive entombed in rock. That's it. That's our hello. We were here note to the future. And let's be honest, it's not exactly Shakespeare. It's more like a messy trash heap. But hey, at least it's something. Now picture some alien geologist millions of years from now studying Earth's layers. They find a peculiar thin band of weirdness, carbon spikes, plastics, traces of radioactive isotopes. They scratch their heads or whatever body part they use for thinking and mutter, odd. Wonder what that was about. And that's us. That's our grand cosmic signature. Odd. Kind of humbling, isn't it? Let's get a bit whimsical here. Suppose a past civilization did exist. What if they too left behind traces we've already found, only we didn't realize what they were? What if some mysterious mineral deposit is actually the remains of their industrial waste? What if some oddly uniform sediment layer is the equivalent of their microplastics? What if we've been walking past their graveyards and calling them interesting geology? It's possible. Unlikely, sure, but possible. This is where humor helps us cope, because otherwise the thought can get a little eerie. Imagine you're holding a fossil in your hand, proudly thinking it's a shell or a fern, but actually it's the last fragment of an ancient coffee mug. The world's first latte art, lost forever. Okay, maybe not, but you see the point. Let's flip the script for a second. If someone after us were looking for evidence, what would they conclude about our time? Maybe they'd find our carbon spike and say, "Ah, yes, a natural methane release. Happens every now and then." They wouldn't know it was us. Maybe they'd stumble upon radioactive isotopes and shrug strange cosmic rays, perhaps. In other words, it's entirely possible we'll leave behind clues, but no story to go with them. No names, no cities, no memes, just chemistry. And honestly, that's probably how the universe keeps secrets. Not with locked doors or conspiracies, but with silence, with the slow, steady hand of time. There's also a philosophical kicker here. If civilizations can rise and fall unnoticed, then intelligence is not the climax of Earth's story. It's just one subplot. We like to think of ourselves as the main characters, but maybe we're just guest stars in a much bigger, much weirder show. It's like walking into a movie halfway through and assuming the whole thing was written just for your scene. Meanwhile, the dinosaurs had their act. The trilobites had theirs. Maybe the Silurians too. And when we're gone, the play goes on. That's both humbling and oddly comforting. It means we're not alone in the cycle of rise and fall. We're just the latest verse in Earth's very, very long song. Let's not forget the funny side of all this, because if you can't laugh at your own impermanence, you're probably going to have a bad time. Imagine some future species misinterpreting our remains. They find the Statue of Liberty's head and think it was a giant hat. They dig up a smartphone and assume it was a ceremonial mirror. They find a disco ball and decide it was our primary source of light. Honestly, that sounds about right. Archaeology is basically educated guessing, and our leftovers aren't exactly self-explanatory. Here's another angle. If we suspect there could have been civilizations before us, shouldn't we also wonder if there could be civilizations after us? Maybe humans vanish, but in a few million years, something else takes our place. Maybe dolphins figure out tool use. Maybe octopuses rise from the oceans. Maybe cockroaches, the ultimate survivors, start writing their own bedtime stories. And they'll look back at us puzzled, wondering if they're the first, just like we do now. So what's the point of all this? Why spend so much time chasing shadows of civilizations that might not exist? Because in the end, the exercise teaches us to look deeper, think wider, and accept uncertainty. It's not really about proving there were lizard engineers in the Silurian. It's about sharpening our ability to see subtle traces, to question our assumptions, and to imagine possibilities. And honestly, that's what science is all about: curiosity. As you lie back tonight, let your mind wander. Think about the strange idea that may be hidden in the rocks beneath your feet. There are whispers of stories older than we can imagine. Think about the future where our own traces will fade. And think about the absurd, wonderful possibility that the universe is filled with civilizations we'll never know, because time erases almost everything, but not tonight. Tonight you get to keep the thought alive. And maybe in that small act of wondering, you're keeping the fire of curiosity burning, one that might outlast us all. Sleep well, fellow traveler. The story continues tomorrow. Let's take a detour and think about memory. Not human memory, though. Yes, I still forget where I put my keys, but Earth's memory, because that's really what we're asking. What does the planet remember, and what does it forget? The Earth keeps records, but they're not neat journals written with ink. They're messy, layered, coded in ways we only half understand. Rocks, ice sediments, tree rings, they're the scribbles of deep time. And like any old diary, the pages are sometimes smudged, ripped out, or rewritten. The truth is, Earth is a terrible librarian. If you returned a book late, it wouldn't just fine you. It would throw the book into a volcano, grind the ashes under glaciers, and then flood the library for good measure. That's what we're working with. So when we wonder whether ancient civilizations once thrived, we're basically searching the archives of a forgetful librarian who also moonlights as a demolition crew. Still, the planet does keep some secrets. Tiny ones, whispers. Imagine little anomalies hidden in layers of rock, strange chemical spikes, odd isotopic ratios, deposits that just don't fit the natural script. They're like smudged fingerprints left on an old door frame. Not proof, but enough to make you tilt your head and go, wait a second. One of those anomalies is the Bedtime, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, about 56 million years ago. A time when carbon levels spiked and the planet heated dramatically. Now, geologists will tell you it was probably natural, massive volcanic activity, methane release, that sort of thing. But when you look at it through the lens of the Silurian hypothesis, you can't help but ask, could this have been something else? Not because we're conspiracy theorists, but because science thrives on asking the uncomfortable questions. Even if the answer is no, the act of asking helps us sharpen our tools. And here's the kicker. Even if ancient civilizations did exist, we might never know. Not because the evidence isn't there, but because we're looking in the wrong way. Imagine trying to spot Wi-Fi signals with a telescope. You'll never see them, even though they're everywhere. What if the traces of past intelligence don't look like anything we'd recognize? What if their version of plastic wasn't our plastic? What if their waste, their energy sources, their artifacts all decomposed into forms indistinguishable from nature? It's humbling. We might be blind to entire chapters of Earth's story simply because we're not fluent in the language it was written in. But let's pause and laugh a little. Imagine if those ancient beings left behind something utterly ridiculous just to mess with the future. A massive stone monument shaped like a rubber duck, a perfectly preserved stadium built entirely for snail racing, a gigantic inscription in the rock that says good luck figuring this out. And we'd never know, because time has already erased it. Sometimes I wonder if history itself has a sense of humor. Of course, the Silurian hypothesis isn't really about proving lizard people ran factories in the Jurassic. It's about perspective, about remembering that intelligence, as grand as it seems to us, may be fleeting. Civilizations can bloom and vanish, leaving only whispers behind. And maybe that's the biggest lesson for us. Because right now, we're writing our own chapter in Earth's book. Our carbon emissions, our plastics, our nuclear signatures, they're all ink on the page. And one day, someone or something might come across them. Will they see us as a great civilization, or as a strange blip, or maybe just as that weird thin layer full of plastic? That's up to us. Let's get a bit more cosmic for a moment. If we can barely detect signs of hypothetical civilizations here on Earth, imagine how hard it is to detect them on other planets. Astronomers stare at light from distant worlds, teasing out hints of atmospheres, chemical signatures, temperature changes, and maybe one day they'll find something odd, an unexpected molecule, a strange combination of gases, something that whispers someone was here. But remember, they won't be seeing cities. They won't be seeing spaceships. They'll be seeing chemistry, subtle traces, civilization reduced to a fingerprint in the air. Kind of poetic, isn't it? That across the cosmos, civilizations may meet each other, not with greetings, but with echoes of pollution. Hello, we existed, written in smog. And then comes the haunting possibility. What if every civilization eventually writes the same tragic story? They rise, they flourish, they invent, they pollute, and then they vanish, leaving only chemical ghosts behind. If that's true, then maybe intelligence isn't the universe's crown jewel. Maybe it's just a spark, bright, brief, beautiful, and fragile. But hey, don't panic. Remember, this is still a bedtime story, and bedtime stories need hope. Here's the hopeful part. Knowing how fragile we are might just help us survive longer. If the earth has reset the board before, maybe we can learn not to push it too far this time. Maybe the very act of wondering whether we were the first will help us avoid being the last. That's the quiet power of imagination. It's not just entertainment, it's rehearsal. By picturing other possibilities, we prepare ourselves to choose better futures. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the deep layers beneath you. Imagine whispers of lost stories, civilizations, forgotten worlds, remade. Imagine distant planets with their own mysteries, waiting for someone curious enough to look. And then remember this, right now you are part of a living civilization, one that dreams questions and tells stories, one that leaves traces, one that for better or worse will be remembered in some form for millions of years. It may not be a neat record, it may not even make sense to whoever comes next, but it will be there. And in that thought, there's both humility and wonder. So rest easy, dreamer. You're not just a listener of stories. You're also part of the story itself. And who knows, maybe millions of years from now, someone will stumble upon a thin layer in the rock, tilt their head, and whisper, "Wait a second. Let's take another step into the strange territory of time." Because when we talk about lost civilizations, we're also talking about patience, the kind of patience that only planets and stars really have. Humans, we get annoyed waiting 5 minutes for coffee. The Earth, it shrugs at a million years like it's a commercial break. This difference in scale is why so much slips through our fingers. Our lives are tiny flashes compared to geological ages. Civilizations may last a few thousand years, maybe tens of thousands if they're lucky, but the rocks measure time in millions. That mismatch alone makes it almost impossible to hold on to evidence. It's like writing your name on the beach. For a few minutes, it's there. The waves roll in and soon gone. Not even a trace. Civilizations are the same. And yet, people often ask, if there was another civilization, wouldn't we see something obvious, like giant ruins or metal structures buried deep underground? Well, not really. Metals corrode, stone crumbles, even concrete, which we think is tough, has a limited lifespan in the face of weathering. Unless you build something on the scale of the pyramids, and even those are wearing down, it's not likely to last more than a few tens of thousands of years, a blink in geological time. The truth is, permanence is an illusion. The Earth is always erasing and rewriting. Even the Himalayas will eventually flatten. The Grand Canyon will fill. Our skyscrapers dust. That's why looking for a smoking gun of ancient civilizations is so tricky. We're searching for needles in haystacks, where the haystacks themselves keep getting replaced. Still, it's not hopeless. Some things linger. Weird chemical signals in sediments, odd isotopic spikes, fossilized layers that don't match expectations. These are the whispers of the past. Not ruins, but residues. Take, for example, the iridium layer that marked the asteroid impact, which ended the dinosaurs. One thin line of unusual chemistry across the globe, and it tells us a whole story. That's the kind of evidence we'd expect from lost civilizations. Thin, subtle, but global. And maybe, just maybe we've already found some of those signals, but haven't recognized them yet. This raises a funny thought. What if our textbooks are full of examples of natural phenomena that were actually leftovers from someone else? A carbon spike volcanoes, a weird mineral layer, meteorite, a sudden extinction, climate event. Maybe we've been explaining away ancient civilizations with natural causes because we just didn't consider the alternative. It's like blaming the dog every time cookies go missing, when maybe there's a cookie thief no one talks about. Of course, there's a danger here. If we get too enthusiastic, we risk turning science into speculation without grounding. That's why the Silurian hypothesis is careful. It doesn't claim hidden civilizations existed. It just asks, if they did, how would we know? And that's the beauty of it. It's not about certainty. It's about sharpening our questions. Now let's zoom out, way out, because this isn't just an Earth problem. If we struggle to read our own planet's history, imagine the challenge of reading other worlds. Mars, for instance. The red planet is littered with signs of ancient rivers, lakes, maybe even oceans. If life or something more ever took root, there would we know, or would we chalk up all the evidence to geology, just like we might have done here? Venus, too, hides mysteries beneath its thick, choking atmosphere. Some scientists wonder if it was once Earth-like, with oceans and maybe life before a runaway greenhouse effect turned it into an oven. If that's true, what traces might still linger beneath the clouds? And don't even get me started on exoplanets. Worlds we see only as dots of light, where the only clues come from faint signatures in starlight. If an entire civilization had once thrived there, the odds of us spotting their traces are slim to none. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised if the universe feels quiet. Maybe it's full of civilizations whose stories have already been erased. Let's ground this with a metaphor. Think of the universe as a beach. Civilizations are like sandcastles. They rise, they're beautiful, they're intricate, and then the tide comes in. The castles vanish, leaving behind only smooth sand. If you walk the beach the next morning, you might never guess there had been castles at all. That's us. That's maybe everyone. The builders come and go, but the tide always wins. But before you get too sad, let's remember the humor in this. Because if civilizations do leave behind traces, imagine how confusing they could be. Picture a future species finding one of our shopping malls fossilized in stone. What would they think? Ah, yes, a temple complex where humans worshipped glowing rectangles and offered sacrifices of credit cards. Or imagine they discover a fossilized lawn gnome. Clearly, this was their deity, half dwarf, half wizard, entirely terrifying. That's the problem with evidence. It doesn't come with an instruction manual. Still, even with the gaps, even with the erasures, the act of wondering matters. When we ask about lost civilizations, we're also asking about ourselves, about what we'll leave behind and how fragile our achievements really are. Because here's the irony. We think of technology as permanent, but in the long run, nature is tougher. A tree can outlast an empire. A shell can fossilize when a skyscraper cannot. The humble often endure where the mighty fade. There's a lesson in that, don't you think? And maybe that's why these questions are so captivating. They remind us that the universe is bigger than us, that time is deeper than we can grasp, and that permanence is an illusion. It's humbling, but it's also freeing, because if nothing lasts forever, then maybe we don't need to take ourselves quite so seriously. We can laugh, build, dream, and tell stories, not because they'll last forever, but because they matter now. So tonight, as you close your eyes, think of Earth not as a static rock, but as a storyteller. One that speaks slowly, erases often, and sometimes tells jokes we don't get. Somewhere in those layers of rock, there might be stories older than imagination. Some will uncover, some will never know. And that's okay, because the mystery itself is part of the wonder. Let's circle back to something that's easy to forget. The Earth itself isn't trying to preserve our story. It's not a museum carefully dusting artifacts and labeling displays. It's more like a messy artist, constantly repainting the same canvas, layering new strokes over the old. Sometimes the older picture peeks through, but most of the time it's buried. That means the odds are stacked against us when it comes to finding traces of anything ancient, even our own traces. Think about it. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, how long would our works last? Our skyscrapers would start to crumble in decades. Our roads would crack within centuries. In 1,000 years, most cities would look like vague bumps in the landscape. And in 1,000,000 years, probably nothing recognizable at all. The Earth doesn't keep souvenirs. It keeps hints, whispers. So how do we listen to those whispers? That's the real challenge. One way is by studying geochemical markers, fancy words. But the idea is simple. When something big happens on Earth, like a mass extinction or a sudden burst of activity, it leaves behind a chemical signature, a kind of planetary oops. Something happened here, scribbled into the rock. Carbon isotopes, oxygen ratios, unusual minerals, all of these can act like breadcrumbs. Follow them, and you might find your way back to a story. But here's the twist. Those breadcrumbs don't tell you who did it. They only tell you that something happened. Was it volcanoes, asteroids, climate swings, or maybe, just maybe, civilizations? That's where imagination steps in. And imagination matters, because if we don't allow ourselves to wonder, we'll never look in the right places. Let's imagine for a moment. Suppose there really was a civilization long before us, not just hunter-gatherers or small tribes, but something big, cities, technology industry. What would be left after tens of millions of years? Not buildings, not statues, probably not even bones, but maybe a thin layer of something odd in the rock, a chemical signal that doesn't quite belong. Imagine future geologists, whether human or otherwise, puzzling over a strange layer of plastics or nuclear residues. What on earth happened here, they'd ask. And maybe if they're curious enough, they'd guess, could this have been people? That's the power of whispers. They make us ask questions bigger than ourselves. Of course, sometimes the questions lead us to funny places. Like, what if the only thing that survived millions of years from our time was fast food packaging? Picture some future species discovering a perfectly preserved ketchup packet. They'd conclude our entire civilization revolved around small red pouches of tangy sauce. Or imagine a fossilized smartphone. Without context, it would look like a shiny black rock. Would they guess it once held 1 billion photos of cats? Probably not. The joke is on us. What we think of as important might vanish while the silly stuff lingers. But there's a serious side here too, because when we think about lost civilizations, we're also forced to think about our own. What will we leave behind? Our emissions, our plastics, our radiation. Will future beings look back and see us as a grand civilization or just a strange blip in the geological record? It's a sobering thought, but also a motivating one. Because if we care about our legacy, we have to act like it. We can't stop the earth from erasing things. It's too good at that. But we can choose what kind of trace we leave. Will it be one of destruction or one of care? And maybe that's why stories like the Silurian hypothesis capture our imaginations. They're not really about lizard people building factories in the Jurassic. They're about perspective. They remind us that intelligence, no matter how powerful, is fragile against time. That civilizations, no matter how mighty, can vanish almost without a trace. And they remind us that if we want our story to last, not forever, but long enough to matter, we have to live wisely. Now let's stretch our imagination even further. Suppose ancient civilizations did exist, but they weren't like us at all. Maybe they weren't even human-like. Maybe their intelligence took a form we'd struggle to recognize. Perhaps they lived in the oceans, building structures of organic material that dissolved without a trace. Or perhaps they manipulated genetics instead of machines, leaving behind ecosystems we can't distinguish from natural ones. It's possible that traces of intelligence are hidden in plain sight, not as monuments, but as modifications to the fabric of life itself. That idea might sound wild, but think about what we're already doing. Genetically modified crops, engineered bacteria, altered ecosystems. If someone looked millions of years in the future, would they see those as natural or artificial? The line blurs, and maybe it always has. Here's the hopeful twist. Even if civilizations are forgotten, curiosity survives. Every time we dig question and imagine we're part of an ancient tradition ourselves, a tradition of seekers. We may never find proof of lost civilizations, but the search connects us to something bigger, the vastness of time, the mystery of the cosmos, the fragility of life. And honestly, that's reason enough to keep wondering. Before we drift towards sleep, let's try a thought experiment. Close your eyes and imagine Earth 100 million years from now. The continents have shifted, the mountains have eroded, the oceans have carved new paths, and deep in the layers of rock, there's a thin line, a strange chemical spike. Someone, something, uncovers it. They tilt their head and ask, "What was this?" They may never know the answer, but in that moment, they've joined us in the same act of wonder. And that perhaps is the most enduring legacy of all. So rest easy. The earth may be forgetful, but curiosity is eternal. And tonight, as you dream, you're part of that story too. When we talk about forgotten civilizations, it's tempting to imagine grand monuments, tall spires, vast cities, glowing machines buried beneath the dirt. Hollywood has trained us to think in images of treasure maps and lost temples, but in reality, the true signs of civilization might be much smaller. Not statues, not pyramids, but patterns. Patterns in the soil. Patterns in the chemistry of rocks. Patterns in the layers of fossils. Subtle fingerprints, not grand paintings. And here's the hard truth. Patterns are easy to miss. We look for drama, but the earth hides its stories in whispers. Let's take an example from our own world. In the past 2 centuries, humans have changed the chemistry of the planet. We've pumped carbon into the atmosphere, spread plastics into the oceans, and scattered radioactive isotopes through the soil. Now imagine a geologist from 50 million years in the future. They're digging through the layers. Suddenly, they hit the 21st century. What do they see? They'd notice a sharp spike in carbon. They might find microplastics trapped in sediments. They'd stumble on unusual isotopes that don't appear naturally. To them, it wouldn't look like skyscrapers or smartphones. It would look like a weird chemical blip, a mystery. That's what civilizations leave behind, not glory, but anomalies. So maybe the question isn't, did ancient civilizations exist, but have we mistaken their anomalies for nature? A sudden warming period, maybe volcanoes, or maybe smokestacks, an odd fossil distribution, maybe climate change, or maybe agriculture, a weird mineral concentration, maybe a meteorite, or maybe mining. We lean toward natural explanations because they're safer, less dramatic, and frankly, more likely. But what if just once the wild explanation was right? Here's where humor helps keep us sane. Imagine ancient beings leaving behind not high-tech wonders, but ridiculous artifacts. Picture a team of paleontologists discovering a fossilized rubber duck. The headlines would explode: Jurassic bath time confirmed, or a layer of rock filled with millions of identical cups. Clearly, future scientists would conclude this civilization was obsessed with ritual hydration. The line between serious science and absurd comedy is thinner than we think. But let's not laugh too hard, because this cuts both ways. What if we are the joke? Imagine millions of years from now, the only thing that survives from our time is a mountain of fast food toys. Some future being studies them carefully and declares these figurines were their gods. Clearly, they worshipped a yellow sponge and a mouse with oversized ears. That's the risk of evidence without context. You can misinterpret anything if you don't know the story. And maybe that's happening already. Maybe we've seen the evidence of past civilizations, but we've explained it away with the wrong story. This idea is both humbling and oddly comforting. It means we're not the first to ask these questions. If other civilizations existed, maybe they asked the same things about their predecessors, and maybe future beings will ask the same about us. It becomes a chain of curiosity stretching through time. No one gets the full answer, but everyone asks the question. So, what does this mean for us right now? For one thing, it means we should broaden how we search. Instead of looking only for obvious ruins, we should look for oddities, unusual patterns in carbon metals, isotopes, geological hiccups that don't have easy explanations. It also means we should stay humble about what we think we know. Science isn't just about certainty, it's about curiosity. And sometimes the best discoveries come when we admit we might be wrong. That's the spirit behind the Silurian hypothesis. Not there were dinosaurs with laptops, but if something intelligent existed, what would the evidence look like? It's a thought experiment, and thought experiments are powerful. They stretch our minds like exercise for curiosity. Let's imagine for a moment what an ancient, advanced civilization might have looked like if it existed. Not spaceships or laser beams, maybe just a society like ours, but with its own quirks. They farmed, they built, they traded. Maybe they even laughed at bad jokes. And then, like us someday, they vanished. Time swept over them. Their monuments crumbled. Their cities dissolved. Now all that's left is a faint echo in the rocks. And here we are, millions of years later, wondering if the echo is real or just our imagination. That's both eerie and beautiful. But let's not drift too far into melancholy. There's also a funny angle here. If ancient civilizations did exist, maybe they weren't anything like us. Maybe they thought differently, lived differently, laughed at things we'd never understand. For all we know, their greatest invention was socks that never got lost in the laundry. Imagine that. An entire society built around solving one of humanity's most annoying problems. And now, lost forever. Civilization erased. Socks scattered to the winds of time. See, even lost civilizations can make you smile. There is also a lesson for us here, because thinking about forgotten civilizations forces us to think about our own fragility. We like to imagine we're permanent, that our skyscrapers will stand forever, that our digital archives will last. But the truth is, time erases everything. The question is not whether our civilization will be forgotten. It's how soon and what trace we'll leave behind. And maybe that realization should inspire us not to despair, but to live more meaningfully. Because if our legacy is temporary, then the real treasure isn't what we leave behind. It's what we do while we're here. So as you drift off tonight, remember, civilizations may vanish, but wonder doesn't. Every time we ask these questions, we're part of something timeless, a great game of curiosity passed from one age to the next. We may never solve the mystery completely, but that's okay. The act of asking is enough. And who knows, maybe millions of years from now, someone will be asking the same thing about us, not with sadness, but with a smile. There's a saying among geologists, the present is the key to the past. In other words, if you want to understand what happened millions of years ago, look at what's happening today. Rivers carve valleys now. So rivers probably carved valleys then. Volcanoes erupt now, so volcanoes erupted then. Ice sheets grind the land today, so they must have done the same long before. It's a powerful idea, but it also blinds us sometimes. Because if something unusual happened, say an ancient industrial civilization, it wouldn't look like anything we're used to seeing. We'd dismiss it. We'd shrug and say, just another volcano. But what if the volcano wasn't a volcano? What if it was a factory? That's where the imagination comes in. Let's rewind Earth's clock hundreds of millions of years. Picture dense forests stretching across supercontinents, giant insects buzzing in humid air, reptiles crawling fish, leaping the world alive in ways both familiar and strange. Now add a twist. Imagine scattered cities not made of concrete and steel, but of materials that don't survive the ages. Maybe they built with wood clay or something organic that crumbled to dust. Imagine farms, trade routes, even art, and then poof, gone, swallowed by time. When we think of it that way, the possibility doesn't feel as impossible. It feels almost natural. But if we can barely find traces of dinosaurs, how would we ever find traces of ancient civilizations? Here's where the science gets interesting, because even if their monuments disappeared, their actions might not. Agriculture changes soil, mining alters rocks, industry shifts carbon levels. These aren't things that just fade overnight. They leave echoes. It's like a detective story. You may not catch the culprit, but you see the footprints. One of the most fascinating examples comes from the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Fancy phrase. But here's the gist. About 56 million years ago, Earth suddenly got a lot warmer. Carbon levels spiked, oceans acidified, species struggled. Sound familiar? It looks eerily like what's happening today. Most scientists say it was caused by massive volcanic eruptions or methane releases. But some wonder, could it have been something else? Could it have been civilization? Probably not. But the point is, we can't be 100% sure. And that sliver of uncertainty is enough to make you tilt your head and wonder. Now, before you start picturing dinosaur CEOs holding board meetings, let's add some humor. Imagine a T-Rex in a business suit struggling to hold a coffee cup with its tiny arms. The quarterly reports are late, the stock market's crashing, and the poor dinosaur can't even type an email. Yeah, maybe they weren't like that, but who knows? Maybe intelligence looked different. Maybe it didn't need skyscrapers or Wi-Fi. Maybe it left marks we just don't recognize. And that brings us to a humbling truth. We don't even understand all of our own traces. Take plastics, for instance. We're producing billions of tons, scattering them into every corner of the planet. In a few million years, those plastics might compress into strange rock layers. Geologists of the future would scratch their heads. What are these, they'd ask? Natural resin? Volcanic glass? Nope. Just our grocery bags and soda bottles. The kicker is they might never realize what they're looking at. That's the lesson. The Earth doesn't label things for us. It doesn't say this was made by humans or this came from volcanoes. It just buries it all together, and it's up to us to guess. And honestly, we're not that good at guessing. Sometimes we think we know everything, but history keeps proving us wrong. Whole civilizations have been rediscovered. After being dismissed as myths, Troy was once a legend. Machu Picchu was hidden. Angkor was swallowed by jungle. If that can happen on a scale of centuries, imagine what can vanish in millions of years. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with humility, with curiosity, with an awareness that our own time on Earth is just a chapter, maybe not even a long one. And it leaves us with responsibility, because if our civilization is destined to be a blip, what kind of blip will it be? Will future beings find a layer of destruction, or will they find evidence of care? That choice is still in our hands. Here's a bedtime thought experiment. Close your eyes and picture Earth 50 million years from now. The continents have drifted. The seas have reshaped. The climate has cycled through heat and ice. Now picture a curious explorer digging through layers of rock. They pause, frowning at a strange chemical spike. Something unusual, something that doesn't fit. They wonder, they imagine, they write theories, and in that moment, across millions of years, they're connected to us, asking the same questions, feeling the same curiosity. That's the true legacy of civilizations, not buildings or monuments, but wonder. So, as you drift off tonight, let that wonder comfort you. The Earth may forget our names, time may erase our works, but curiosity is eternal. And as long as someone somewhere is still asking questions, our story isn't truly gone. If you've been following along, you might notice something interesting. The deeper we dive into Earth's history, the more it feels like detective work. Only this detective doesn't get fingerprints, security cameras, or confessions. Instead, the clues are scattered across billions of tons of rock, and the suspect list includes volcanoes, asteroids, ice ages, and maybe even civilizations. That's a tough case to crack, but also a fun one, because every clue sparks imagination. Let's talk about one of the strangest clues: sudden extinctions. Earth's history is full of them. The dinosaurs, of course, are the famous case, but there were many others, some even bigger. Each time a thriving world collapsed almost overnight in geological terms. The usual suspects are impacts and eruptions. An asteroid slams in dust clouds, block the sun, everything freezes. Or a supervolcano burps out toxic gases, the skies darken, species collapse. But what if one of those extinctions wasn't natural? What if it was industrial collapse, pollution, climate swings, runaway technology? It's a long shot, but not impossible. Here's the tricky part. Extinction looks the same on paper, whether it's caused by asteroids or industry. A sudden spike in carbon, a layer of strange minerals, fossils disappearing. That's like finding a body, but no murder weapon. You can list the possibilities, but certainty slips away. And that's why these questions are both frustrating and fascinating. We may never know the full truth, but the not knowing keeps us asking. Now, let's throw in a bit of humor before this gets too heavy. Picture an advanced reptile civilization that accidentally wiped itself out by inventing the world's spiciest chili pepper. They loved it so much, they kept eating it despite the consequences. Eventually, the species couldn't handle it. Extinction by hot sauce. Okay, that's silly. But it makes the point civilizations don't need giant asteroids to disappear. Sometimes they do it to themselves. And that brings us to the sobering mirror. What about us? When we pump carbon into the atmosphere, when we strip forests, when we flood the oceans with plastic, aren't we leaving the same kinds of traces we'd look for in ancient times? We often imagine ourselves as discoverers of mysteries, but in reality, we're also authors of one. Millions of years from now, someone may be asking, what happened here? Why did everything suddenly shift? And the answer might be us. This realization gives us two choices. Choice 1, despair. Oh no, we're doomed. Nothing matters past the ice cream. Choice 2, perspective. Realizing that while civilizations may fade, life itself endures. The earth has seen collapse before, and yet here we are. That perspective can be oddly comforting. Yes, we're fragile. Yes, we're temporary. But we're also part of something vast and resilient. Now let's stretch the imagination further. Suppose ancient civilizations existed, but they weren't industrial in the way we think. Maybe they harnessed energy in ways we can't even imagine. Maybe they lived symbiotically with ecosystems, so their traces blended seamlessly with nature. To us, that would look invisible. But to them, it would have been advanced. It's a humbling thought. Maybe advanced doesn't mean skyscrapers or microchips. Maybe it means harmony. Maybe the most advanced civilization is the one that leaves the least behind. Here's a funny twist on that idea. What if the most advanced civilization left absolutely nothing because they recycled everything perfectly? Future geologists dig through the layers and find nothing unusual. Perfect balance, no plastics, no pollution, no carbon spike. The scientists would shrug and say, guess nothing special happened back then. Meanwhile, that was the golden age of intelligent life, and we'd never know. That makes you think about our own story, because if we want to be remembered, we have to decide, do we want to be remembered for balance or for mess? Both will leave traces. The question is, which one future explorers will find more inspiring? Let's end this part with a little bedtime experiment. Close your eyes. Picture Earth, not as a planet of dirt and rock, but as a giant library. Each layer of stone is a book, each fossil a page, each chemical marker a scribbled note in the margin. We're both readers and writers in this library. We're trying to decode old stories, and at the same time, we're writing our own. The catch: the library isn't permanent. Pages get torn out, ink fades, whole shelves collapse. But for now, we get to read, we get to wonder, we get to write, and that more than monuments or mysteries might be the real gift of civilization. If you've ever walked along a beach and spotted a strange shell or a piece of driftwood carved by the waves, you know the feeling of stumbling across something mysterious. Now imagine that feeling stretched across millions of years. That's geology in a nutshell, except the shell might be the size of a continent, and the mystery could rewrite everything we think we know. We've spent the last few parts exploring the possibility of forgotten civilizations. And here's the kicker. Even if we never find clear evidence, the very act of wondering changes how we see our world. Because suddenly, every rock layer feels like a question. Every fossil feels like a clue. Every anomaly feels like a whisper from the past. Take, for instance, the black shales. These are ancient layers of dark, organic, rich rock found in many places around the world. They formed during times when oceans lost oxygen and life struggled. Most scientists explain them as natural, caused by climate shifts, volcanic activity, or changes in sea circulation. But some thinkers ask, could they be signs of industrial collapse? Could they be remnants of civilizations that pushed their ecosystems too far? Again, probably not. But asking the question keeps our curiosity alive. Here's a funny angle. Imagine future scientists studying our own black layers. They'd find plastic particles, aluminum concrete dust, and maybe even chicken bones. Because fun fact, chickens are now the most common bird species on Earth, thanks to us. So millions of years from now, when paleontologists dig through our layer, they might think, wow, this species really loved poultry. Must have been their national bird, or maybe their god. The truth, just nuggets and sandwiches. But without context, anything can sound profound. That's the heart of the problem. Context dies faster than evidence. A broken smartphone found 1,000,000 years from now would just look like a weird shiny rock. A collapsed skyscraper would compress into rubble, indistinguishable from natural stone. But the chicken bones, those survive. The junk food toys, they fossilize. So our descendants may not remember Shakespeare, but they'll definitely remember SpongeBob. Immortality takes funny forms. This leads to a deeper thought. Maybe the same thing happened before. Maybe ancient beings left behind their equivalent of SpongeBob toys, and we just haven't recognized them. Think about it. How many odd fossils have we classified as unknown species when they might have been artifacts? How many chemical anomalies have we shrugged off as volcanic when they were actually something else? It's not that scientists are careless, it's that nature has a way of disguising everything. So what can we actually do to sharpen our search? One idea, look for patterns that nature doesn't usually make. Straight lines, symmetry, repetition. These are hallmarks of intelligence, but even that is tricky. Crystals grow in straight lines. Honeycombs are symmetrical. River deltas look like fractals. Nature already does geometry better than we do, which means the difference between natural and artificial may not be as obvious as we think. Here's a lighthearted way to put it. Imagine explaining a skyscraper to an ant. To the ant, it's just a cliff with lots of tunnels, no concept of offices, elevators, or tax paperwork. Now imagine us looking at an ancient geological formation. To us, it's just a rock. To them, maybe it was a monument. Perspective is everything. And that's why questions about lost civilizations are so powerful. Not because they give us answers, but because they stretch our perspective. They remind us that the universe doesn't owe us clarity. The past doesn't hand us a script. We piece it together with fragments, guesses, and a bit of imagination. And sometimes imagination is just as important as evidence. Let's step back for a moment. Even if we never confirm ancient civilizations, this whole thought experiment teaches us something about ourselves. It teaches us humility. We don't know everything. It teaches us fragility. Civilizations come and go. And it teaches us creativity. Even in uncertainty, we can build meaning. That's not bad for a bedtime story. Now let's add one more humorous twist. Before we close this part, imagine if we did find undeniable evidence tomorrow. Let's say a fossilized shopping cart, perfectly preserved. How would humanity react? Half the world would scream, "Proof." The other half would shout, "Fake news." And somewhere in the middle, a late-night comedian would joke, "Turns out aliens invented Costco." That's the reality of discovery. It's never just about evidence. It's about interpretation, belief, and sometimes memes. So, as you settle down tonight, remember the earth is full of mysteries, but so are we. We may not solve them all. We may not even understand our own traces. But the act of wondering, the pause, the smile, the spark of imagination, that's something no extinction, no erosion, no passing time can erase. And in that way, we're not just searching for forgotten civilizations. We are one writing our story in the rocks, hoping someone someday will care enough to wonder. When we talk about civilizations, we usually picture big, obvious things, pyramids, temples, skyscrapers. But maybe that's our human bias showing. Maybe advanced life doesn't always build giant monuments. Maybe sometimes the greatest achievements are invisible. Think about trees. They don't build cities, but they change the air, the soil, even the climate. Whole forests shape the world quietly, without ever writing a blueprint. So who's to say an ancient civilization couldn't have done something similar? Maybe they were masters of biology, reshaping ecosystems in ways we can't detect anymore. Maybe their skyscrapers were living towers of coral. Maybe their factories were fields of engineered fungi. Sounds wild, but here's the point. Our imagination is often too narrow. And that's a problem, because if we only look for traces that look like us, we might miss everything else. We're basically detectives, searching for fingerprints, while the culprit wore gloves. No wonder the case feels cold. Here's a fun twist. Imagine if an ancient species developed intelligence but never invented technology. Instead, they just got really good at storytelling. Maybe whole lineages of creatures passed down knowledge, not with machines, but with memory and song. In that case, when they vanished, their wisdom vanished with them. Nothing physical left behind, except maybe a strange fossil of a creature that looks suspiciously like it was always singing. But let's ground this back into science for a second, because even without fossils of singing creatures, there are odd clues in Earth's layers. For example, sudden spikes in rare metals like iridium. Usually we blame asteroids, but what if some spikes had other causes? What if someone was mining, refining, or even experimenting? Again, probably natural, but the fact that we have to ask shows how fragile our knowledge is. And here's the irony. While we're squinting at ancient rocks, looking for civilizations, we're also busy leaving behind our own. Concrete, plastic, radio waves, satellites, the list goes on. Millions of years from now, our story will be layered into the earth, and whoever finds it, if anyone, will have the same debates we're having now. Was this natural, or was someone here? And maybe they'll laugh at the absurdity the way we laugh at the idea of reptile CEOs. Speaking of absurdity, let's pause for a humorous picture. Imagine future geologists holding up a fossilized rubber duck. They argue at a conference, scientist A clearly, this was a sacred idol. Scientist B, no, it's an early flotation device. Scientist C, you fools, it was their king. Meanwhile, the truth, it was just bath time. That's the risk of interpretation. Without context, even the most ordinary objects become mysteries. And that brings us to one of the most humbling truths of all: we are temporary interpreters. We think we're reading the past, but really we're projecting ourselves onto it. We see faces in clouds, gods in thunder, civilizations in rocks. Maybe sometimes we're right. Maybe sometimes we're just telling bedtime stories to ourselves. But either way, the act of telling matters, because stories guide us. Here's something to think about before you sleep tonight. Even if ancient civilizations never existed, the story of them still teaches us. It teaches us humility, because we're not as permanent as we like to think. It teaches us perspective, because the world has been changing long before us, and will keep changing long after. And it teaches us imagination, because sometimes the questions are more powerful than the answers. If you want a metaphor, picture Earth as a giant chalkboard. Every few million years, someone writes on it. Then time comes along with a big eraser. Right now, we're writing furiously. Skyscrapers, highways, Wi-Fi signals. Someday, the eraser will come. But maybe, just maybe, some faint chalk lines will remain. Enough for a future reader to squint at and say, something happened here. And maybe that's all we can hope for. Here's a funny bedtime twist to end this part. Imagine if the only thing that survived us was a single fortune cookie. A geologist cracks it open in the year 60 million AD. Inside it reads, "You will soon take a long journey." That poor scientist would lose their mind. This ancient culture predicted me. They were geniuses. And just like that, history repeats, not with certainty, but with wonder, confusion, and a little laughter. When people imagine ancient civilizations, they often picture stone temples, golden artifacts, or mysterious statues staring out over the ocean. But maybe that's just because those are the things that last long enough for us to notice. What about everything that didn't last? Think about it. 99% of what we build today won't survive 1,000 years, let alone 1,000,000. Wood rots, steel rusts, plastics eventually break down, even concrete crumbles. So if there was a civilization tens of millions of years ago, most of its world would have vanished without a trace. That's not science fiction. That's just erosion chemistry and time doing their jobs. Now here's the twist. The earth doesn't just erase, it recycles. Every mountain gets ground down into sand. Every ocean bed gets pushed up into a mountain. Every continent drifts, collides, or splits. It's like the planet is constantly shuffling its deck, hiding the old cards inside the new. Which means, if a civilization came before us, its traces may not just be buried, they may have been transformed. A tower could be pressed into stone. A highway could be stretched into a vein of minerals. A whole city could be reduced to a chemical signature. It's the ultimate recycling program. And we're not the beneficiaries. We're the forgetful children who inherited the deck. Let's add a dose of humor here before it gets too heavy. Imagine if somewhere deep under your feet, right now, lies the compressed fossil of an ancient amusement park. The roller coasters are now veins of quartz. The cotton candy stand is a pocket of salt. And the Ferris wheel, That one probably just rusted quietly into nothing. Future scientists would never know the joy of screaming on a loop-de-loop. They'd just call it a naturally occurring mineral deposit. And honestly, isn't that a little tragic? This is why we dig. This is why we keep asking. Because the more we learn about Earth's ability to erase and recycle, the more we realize how fragile our own chapter is. We want to believe we'll be remembered, but in geological time, remembrance is rare. The Earth is less like a diary and more like an etch-a-sketch. Shake it enough and the picture is gone. So how do we deal with that? Do we despair or do we smile at the absurdity? Personally, I vote for both. First, despair, just a little so we stay humble. Then smile so we stay sane. Because here's the truth, our monuments aren't for eternity. They're for us. They're for right now. They're proof that we existed, even if only for a blink. And honestly, that's enough. But the question of ancient forgotten civilizations isn't really about the past. It's about the present. Because when we ask, could there have been others before us? We're really asking, could there be others after us? And that's a haunting thought. If we vanish tomorrow, what will the earth remember about us? What story will the rocks tell? A story of balance or a story of excess? A story of harmony or a story of collapse? That choice is still ours, at least for now. Here's a bedtime metaphor to carry with you. Imagine Earth as a giant stage. Species are actors. Civilizations are short plays. The curtain rises. The actors perform. The audience, which is just the universe itself, watches for a while. Then the curtain falls. The stage doesn't change much. The props get reused. A new play begins. Right now, it's our turn under the lights. We may not know how the story ends, but we do know this someday the curtain will fall and someone or something will take our place. That's not tragedy, that's theater, and we're lucky to have a role. Before we wrap this part up, let's add one last dash of humor, because what's a bedtime story without a smile? Picture a far future archaeologist holding up a fossilized smartphone. They point to the little Apple logo on the back and declare, this was clearly their sacred fruit. They must have worshipped it. Meanwhile, all we were doing was scrolling memes. That's how history works. What survives isn't always what mattered most. So here we are at the end of this long journey through time imagination and a few questionable jokes about fossilized rubber ducks. If you've stayed with me this far, congratulations, you now know more about lost civilizations than most people ever think about before bedtime. Which, let's be honest, is exactly the kind of weird trivia that keeps our brains awake at 2 a.m. But before we close, let's zoom out one last time. The whole question, were there civilizations before us, isn't just about curiosity. It's about scale. It's about realizing how unbelievably vast time is and how small we are inside it. If Earth's history were a single 24-hour day, humans only appeared in the last second before midnight. 1 second. That's all our skyscrapers, our internet, our space programs, everything. Just a blink. So if we can do all this in 1 second, what could have happened in the other 80x399? That thought alone is enough to make you dizzy. But instead of dizziness, let's aim for wonder. Because the real gift of questions like these is not certainty, it's imagination. Imagination lets us picture coral skyscrapers, singing creatures, ancient roller coasters, now trapped in stone. It lets us laugh at the idea of fortune cookies predicting the future. And it reminds us that the world is stranger than we give it credit for. Still, let's not forget the serious side. The idea of forgotten civilizations is also a warning. It whispers, don't assume you're permanent. We like to think our achievements are invincible, but so did every empire before us. Rome thought its roads would last forever. The Maya thought their temples would stand untouched. And yet, time had other plans. Maybe the real wisdom here isn't whether civilizations existed before us. Maybe it's realizing that ours won't last forever either. And instead of fearing that we can embrace it, because impermanence doesn't mean insignificance. It means urgency. It means living fully while the curtain is still up. Now, because this is the final stretch, let's sneak in one last bedtime metaphor. Picture life as a sandcastle. You spend hours building it, towers, walls, maybe even a moat. Then the tide comes in and poof, it's gone. Was it pointless? Of course not, because the joy wasn't in how long it lasted. The joy was in the building, the laughter, the creativity. Civilizations are the same. They rise, they fall, and the waves take them. But the meaning isn't erased. It's experienced in the moment. And if you're thinking, well, that's a little heavy for a bedtime story, don't worry, let's lighten it up. Imagine the final surviving trace of humanity is just one fossilized fast food wrapper. A future scientist holds it up and declares, this must have been their sacred script, perhaps a prayer. Meanwhile, it just says 2 cheeseburgers, fries, and a shake. So yeah, that's what we're leaving behind. Not Shakespeare, not Einstein, just snacks. And honestly, that feels about right. But here's the beautiful part. Even if the earth forgets us, we don't forget ourselves. Right now, you're alive in this moment. You're breathing, thinking, maybe, drifting towards sleep as I talk. You're part of a story unfolding right now. And whether the rocks remember us or not, that experience is real. That spark of being is enough. Because at the end of the day, civilizations are just the background. The real miracle is life itself. So what do we take away from all this? First, humility. We're small. That's okay. Second, imagination. The past is bigger than we can prove. Third, humor. Because if we can't laugh at fossilized rubber ducks, what are we even doing here? And finally, gratitude for the fact that in this one blink of cosmic time, we get to wonder, laugh, and dream together. As the curtain falls on this long story, let me leave you with one last picture. Somewhere deep underground in layers we may never see, there might already be faint traces of lives we'll never know. Maybe they're real, maybe they're just illusions. But above all, that here we are telling stories, asking questions, imagining what might have been. That act alone connects us across time, across worlds, maybe even across civilizations. And if there's one thing the universe remembers, maybe it's not the buildings or the bones. Maybe it's the curiosity. Because curiosity, that restless little spark, feels like the one thing too stubborn to ever truly go extinct. So close your eyes, breathe, let the questions linger without needing answers. Maybe there were civilizations before us, maybe not, but tonight we add our voices to the long echo of wonder, and that echo in its own way is eternal.